Welcome back to Ottawa Today with Mark Sutcliffe on 1310 News and Rogers TV.
As the former ambassador to Germany and former ambassador to the United Nations, Paul Heinbecker has offered his views and has been involved in policy discussions and important matters of an international nature. Now, though, in a column in the Ottawa Citizen, he's commenting on something of a decidedly local flavor. He lives in Vanier, and he is saying, don't move the Salvation Army's George Street Shelter and Social Service Center to Vanier. He says it's a very bad decision for Vanier, and Paul Heinbecker joins us on Ottawa Today. Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to talk to you again, and thank you for doing this. So why not? Why the Salvation Army seems to think this is a good move. Why do you think it's not?
Well, I think it concentrates a lot of social services and the shelter in one place. It's not good for Vanier. There are many houses which border on the site. There are apartment buildings directly across the street. There are young families. There are elderly seniors. And there are plenty of young women civil servants who live in that area because it's affordable. And they would all be subject to the difficulties that would necessarily follow from moving a site that big into Vanier. You know, there's the second thing about that it's bad is that should be the Salvation Army's business, but you know, this is a big concentration that they have in mind. I think that the general view these days is that big concentrations of social problems only create bigger concentrations of social problems. If you look at East Hastings in Vancouver, for example, the more you put people together, especially people who are among the most vulnerable, the more trouble you create. The Salvation Army Center becomes a bit of a magnet for predators, for drug dealers, and for everybody else. People who are trying to get clean or trying to live a normal kind of life, you're throwing them together with all kinds of trouble. So I think that it's, you know, and further, it's not consistent with the city plan. The city has a plan for Vanier. And it's intended to be a main street. It's supposed to be a destination. There's work that's to be begun on it, and none of that is consistent with the creation of a very large social services center right in the smack in the middle of Montreal Road. So Montreal Road will not be a destination. People are worried. I can tell you, I've been at meetings. People are worried about their personal safety. They're worried about security. They're worried about property values going down. And this is a place where the property values are not especially high to begin with. So they, all in all, it's seen as a fairly cynical decision by the city to allow this to go forward.
So you know that people are going to react to this by saying, well, this is a case of not in my backyard, that people...
It is indeed.
Okay.
It's a case of not in their backyards, not in the backyards of the people who live in the market there, and not in the backyards of people who live in Westboro or people who live elsewhere, but that it's just fine to dump it in Vanier because, you know, essentially it's a lower income area that people are not going to complain. At least that's the theory. And you can put it there and it's out of sight, out of mind.
But is this just about the people of Vanier saying we don't want the problems associated with this center in our community, or is it a broader issue than that of this isn't the right place for it and there is a better place for it?
It's both. I don't think it's offensive for people to say, look, this is going to have an impact on me. We're going to have, already Vanier has its share of social problems. A walk down Montreal Road now will show you that there are pawn shops and pot shops and cash shops and other kinds of sort of street activity, prostitution and the like. And at the same time, the Vanier has been struggling mightily to sort of lift itself out of that situation. And there was a time when Vanier was both had both the possibility and the prospect of improving. But this would permanently change. This is a watershed moment for Vanier. This will permanently change the place. And as for the larger problem, I don't see why Vanier is an ideal location. In fact, you could make the argument that the market is the ideal location. They are where they should be. That's where their clients are. That's where that's where the transportation hub is. Vanier is not even on the rapid transit, the light rail system at all. There's one bus that runs down Montreal Road. So the idea that this is a very convenient location is not doesn't hold water. And why not leave it on George Street? People who've moved into George Street and the nearby condos have all moved in long after the Salvation Army built their center. So presumably are self-selecting and have accommodated themselves to that situation. Whereas if you move it to Vanier, you're going to impose it on a place that already doesn't want it, that people have been investing in both in terms of business and in terms of their own, people with their own homes.
Right.
And that's all going to be put in jeopardy. And that's because nobody else in the city wants it. So why should Vanier step forward?
And you also have, and just quickly before we let you go, you've got some comments on the process as well. You don't feel that the mayor and the city have handled this well. No, you're right.
It's typical of the functioning of the city of Ottawa and the planning people. Everything is a secret. The mayor has known about this for a very long time. The councillor has known about it for a very long time. All of it. And it isn't announced until it's a done deal, until there's or a nearly done deal. There's an offer by the Salvation Army to buy the property, and all it takes is a zoning change adjustment. And how many times have developers and others got their way with City Hall on changing, the zoning doesn't fit, so instead of insisting on the zoning, which is there for good reasons, the zoning rules, they adjust the zoning rules to let whatever happens happen. 27-story buildings where it used to be 6-story high and all of that sort of thing. Everybody knows that the city is a pushover for developers. And then there's the idea that somehow it's not a done deal until it's voted on. How many rural councillors, how many other councillors are going to say no, you shouldn't do that to Vanier? You should put it somewhere else. I mean, they're all delighted that they don't have to do it themselves. And even our own councillor has a conflict of interest because George Street is also in his ward. So getting it out of one part of his ward and putting it into another, that doesn't. I'm glad he's calling for a halt to it and for a rethink and a reset. And I think that's very important. But I'm not optimistic that short of a very large uproar, which I think is actually building in Vanier, city councillors will do anything else but yawn and vote in favor of it in the expectation that the same councillors will support each other when they have problems they want to deal with. All right. Interesting to hear your opinion on this. Paul Heinbecker, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you. Paul Heinbecker, former Canadian ambassador to the United Nations, writing about a very local issue about where to put the Salvation Army Centre. He's saying don't put it in Vanier. Coming up, we're going to ask you, what should authorities do about the teepee set up by demonstrators on Parliament Hill?
Ottawa Today with Mark Sutcliffe returns on 1310 News and Rogers TV right after this.